Round the straight road.
Bo Boger's going to lead all the way. It's running on well, but still Gold Edition in front. Universal Queensland.
This is for Noel Merlis, you know.
Fantastic for racing here in Queensland because as much as they've had the history was right.
Strawberry Road in front.
Well, he's chosen the whip, but it's not needed. Bamborough knows what he can do. Just watch him do it.
Hello and welcome to this very special presentation of Queensland Thoroughbred Racing, told by the people who helped shape the industry into what it is today. You know, who would have dreamt in their wildest imagination that this was possible? The pioneers of the now thriving Queensland racing industry, which in the 21st century employs so many thousands of thoroughbred lovers and entertains many thousands more, could have come so far from such humble beginnings. Even with their foresight, our forebears could hardly have imagined their first foray into horse racing at Cooper's Plains, west of Brisbane in 1843, would evolve into one of the world's most respected racing arenas. From those humble beginnings, the industry has grown into one of tremendous stature, and the skills conceived during that time have been interwoven into the industry by so many remarkable people who cut their teeth in the Sunshine State before making their mark on the international stage.
But Court's too good. Court races to the front, pulls away, beats Geezer.
Names such as Selwood, Moore, Shoemaker, Dittman, Atkins, McLaughlin, Griffiths, they stand alongside equine superstars such as Burnborough, Dalrello, Strawberry Road, Vo Rogue, Rough Habit and Gold Edition, just to name a few.
They're drawing to the line. He's just in front. Fine Cotton Harbour.
History-making events, some more regrettable than others, like the fine cotton ringing and the Hendra virus outbreak, will be chronicled. But it's the foresight of the Magic Million scheme and the headline-grabbing deeds of the state's favourite sons, daughters, colts and fillies on the Australian and international stage that thrill us the most. But back to where it all began, when ponies and hacks doubled as gallopers and were broken and saddled to compete under the riding of brave pioneering postilions like T.J. O'Shaughnessy and John Brightwell. The first race meeting conducted in Queensland was held at Cooper's Plains in 1843, and records also reveal racing was conducted on a course south of Brisbane at the corner of Vulture, Grey, Melbourne and Stanley Streets, later to become one of the city's most populated spots. The 1866 running of the first Brisbane Cup was still a pipe dream and nearly 2 decades away, and although the Cooper's Plains site had done its job, the early pioneers quickly recognised the site at New Farm as a far more suitable and central location to further grow the sport of kings. Now one of Brisbane's most exclusive suburbs, New Farm would become home to the racing industry from about 1852. In 1853, the Boxing Day meeting at New Farm on the clay course would unearth one of Queensland's first recognised star gallopers, Newbold, who had enough speed to win over half a mile, yet packed enough stamina to score over 2 miles. Tracks from the north to the south and the east to the west were being formed at suburbs such as Kedron, Strathpine, Cooperoo, Hemet and Oxley. And between 1859 and 1860, the formation of the North Australian Jockey Club and Gayndah Jockey Club paved the way for a widespread outbreak of racing outside Brisbane. In August 1865, 2 years after the formation of the Queensland Turf Club, Eagle Farm held its first official race meeting. It was described by journalists at the time as one of the most up-to-date and picturesque racecourses in Australia. But it was far from the first race meeting conducted in the Hamilton and Ascot area, with records showing races had been conducted for purses of £15 on 2 paddocks in close proximity to the course. The first Brisbane Cup, run in 1866 at Eagle Farm under the newly formed Queensland Turf Club, was won by Forrester. while Gayndah played host to the first Queensland Derby when Hermit won the Blue Rebound Classic in 1868. The establishment of other clubs quickly followed, with the Mirrabah Jockey Club, Rockhampton Jockey Club, Townsville Turf Club and Charters Towers Jockey Club paving the way in the north of the state for champion thoroughbreds like Ben Bolt to launch their career. While historians rave in rapture about the amazing feat of the immortal Archer, who was walked from his New South Wales base to win the first two Melbourne Cups in 1861 and 1862, our very own Ben Bolt's marathon journey is legendary stuff. With his loyal and ambitious owner Hugh Strickland by his side, the 1886 Caulfield Cup winner walked the 200 kilometres from his Bowen stable to Mackay, where his pit stop included winning a few races at Oreilly Park, but the trip had its moments.
They came to a place called Brumby Park, where there was a creek by dark, and they asked the selector there if they could camp, and he said yes, and he showed them a nice spot on the bank of the creek to camp. But as it grew dark, and Hugh Strickland, who was the son of William Strickland, he had with him an Aboriginal boy. The two of them came down with the horse. And Hugh Strickland noticed that the Aboriginal boy couldn't settle. And he said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "No good place, bad spirits." And Hugh had also noticed that the selector had taken a bit of an interest in the horse. He saw, so he decided to move on. Sometime later, it might have been 12 months later, the owner of that property, or the selector there, he was tried for murder. And they said what he used to do was, when travellers came through with good horses, he would welcome them and ask them to camp. At night time, he would sneak back and probably hit the man over the head and throw him to the creek and the crocodiles. But anyway, Ben Bolt escaped that.
He was then back on the road, bound for the almost 2,000 kilometres trek to Sydney, and then on to Melbourne, where he defeated Silvermine and Britisher and etched his name in Caulfield Cup history. Closer to home, the Darling Downs Jockey Club at Toowoomba, which would much later become the unlikely base of one of Queensland's best trainers in JJ Atkins. Warwick Jockey Club and Northern Downs Jockey Club at Dalby were formed in the 1870s. And the course by the Brisbane River, or the Breakfast Creek Pony Club as it was then formally known, was conducting racing at the unique sand course of Albion Park in the 1880s. Queensland's first great galloper of the 20th century is undoubtedly Fitz Grafton, a member of the exclusive Queensland Racing Hall of Fame, who was later sold to India, where he won feature races.
He was the pin-up horse of the time, and similar to what you see with, say, Mackay Diva these days. So or Gunsynd for a Queensland horse, the crowd would come to watch a particular horse. Fitz Grafton won the first race in the big race was a Stradbroke Handicap in 1903 as a 2-year-old, the third 2-year-old to win. Reached his peak, I think, probably as a 3 and a 4-year-old. As a 3-year-old, the biggest race was the Brisbane Cup. That was a track record, the fastest 2-mile race ever run in Queensland. Following year, he had carried 10 stone to lead all the way to win the Brisbane Cup. 10 stone's about 64 kilos, so that was a good effort. He was then sold to India for 2,000 guineas, which was a lot of money in those days. And there he won the Viceroy Cup, which was the biggest race in India, India's equivalent of a Melbourne Cup.
Fitz Grafton's fellow equine Hall of Famers of that era, Lockney and Spear Chief, also performed feats unthinkable in today's climate. Lockney won Group 1 races from 6 furlongs to 2 miles, including the 1931 QTC Sires Produce Stakes, the 1934 Stradbroke Handicap, the 1936 Brisbane Cup, and the 1936-37 King Stakes, now known as the PJ O'Shea Stakes. The Spear Chief, trained by Bill Tucker, is best remembered for the biggest upset in Australian racing history, when at 33-1 he beat the 40-1 on favourite Ajax in the 1939 Rawson Stakes in Sydney. But he proved that was no fluke by winning 14 races between 1937 and 1939, including 2 Brisbane Cups, the QTC Derby, the Sires and the Champagne Stakes. In 1929, 10 years after apprentice Jimmy Tucker was killed in a 4-horse pile-up at Eagle Farm that convinced jockeys that skullcaps were the way of the future, the industry underwent a major overhaul. It resulted in a royal commission and forever shaped the future of the sport in Queensland. Unregistered clubs had been under siege for months, but it took the owners, jockeys and trainers strike action in July, which paved the way for the Royal Commission the following September. The Commission sat for 69 days, during which time Melbourne racing identity John Wren admitted to owning 7 unregistered racecourses: Albion Park, Doomben, Kedron, Coorparoo, Ipswich, Strathpine and Sandgate, or Deagon as it is now known. The QTC refused to register privately owned clubs, and as a result of the Royal Commission, proprietary racing was abolished and registered amateur racing restricted to 52 meetings each year. The Brisbane Amateur Racing Club, which had formed in 1923, continued conducting race meetings at Albion Park, but 2 years after the Commission, the last meeting at Kedron was held on December 30, 1931, and winning jockeys included Bart Sinclair Sr., Vince Markey and Leon Gordon. In 1933, the first race meeting was held at Doomben on May 20, with the first race being won by Lady Desling and ridden by Billy Hill for trainer Charles McLaughlin. 500 miles away in the North Queensland town of Mackay, a lad was showing horse skills well beyond his age, and the talk around the district was that young George Moore was something special.
Tom Simmons told me this himself, and Tom Simmons, he was all his life on stations and president of the Turf Club for a good number of years and owned many horses. He told me that one day he had a team of horses working, trying to play a paddock on the property, and George was there. I don't know whether his mother was working there or not, but anyway, George happened to be there, and Tom Simmons was having a lot of trouble. He couldn't get the horses to do what he wanted to do. And George Moore said to him, he said, "Mr. Simmons, you're holding the hand with the reins wrong." And so he showed Tom Simmons, who was a grown man, been on a station all his life, how to hold the reins. And Tom Simmons told me, he said, and he got the horses to do what he wanted.
George was wowing the crowds early in his life at the local Mackay and district show, but not on a galloper.
He won a race on a trot. The shows were great in those days. They had trots. They'd have 3 or 4 trots during the course of an afternoon, and that was when they could ride them as well as drive them in the geese. And George, I think you had to have 10 stone. There were quite a few rode them in those days, and George certainly won a trot there.
3 years later, a young bloke named Jim, call me JJ, Atkins, took out a trainer's licence at Toowoomba on March 13, 1936, following the death of his father, Bill.
He was the best. He was really a great trainer. Didn't train a lot of horses, only 8 or 10, but he did a great job with them.
Atkins arrived in Toowoomba on foot with his only horse by his side, and the man who went on to be honoured in the Hall of Fame promptly registered his stabled silks. As the decade was coming to a close, a jockey from a little town called Banana, about 120 miles southwest of Rockhampton, was taking the country by storm. It was 1938, and Fred Sheen had won the Epsom in Sydney on King's Head, then on to Melbourne to win the Caulfield Cup with Buzzalong, followed by the Melbourne Cup, where he was on the 25-1 Kiwi horse Catalogue, which he'd ridden in the Cox Plate the week before.
Catalogue, another New Zealand hope.
He finished unplaced. I think Ajax won the race, but he beat home a couple of fairly handy horses, Freddie thought. So they said to him, "Would you like to ride him in the Hotham Handicap the following Saturday?" He said, "I'll ride him." So he rode him in the Hotham. He got beat 2 heads. He finished 3rd. He said, "This will do me." So he rode him in the Cup. He said as he was coming at the milepost, the horse, he was a great horse, let the horse do what it wants to do, not what you want to do. And they felt the horse wanted to go, so he just let him go, and he turned, and he went, and he just sort of kept going, turned for home well in front, and he won the Cup by 3 lengths.
Catalog goes on to win by 3 lengths from Bourbon.
And just to finish off his southern raid, Fred and his ride Mount Olive took out 2 major races to wrap up the carnival, leaving the southern jockeys in awe of this man from Queensland.
To win one of the world's greatest turf classics, the Melbourne Cup.
Back then, the groundbreaking formation of Brisbane Racing Club may have been more than 70 years away, but the Queensland racing scene was set, and Doomben and Eagle Farm were on their way to becoming the state's major racecourses.
But for a moment seems to make no impression. Mully shows him the whip, but it's not needed. Burnborough knows what he can do. Just watch him do it.
With the base of racing now firmly in place, the sport of kings in Brisbane was truly making giant strides towards matching it with the bigger financial models in the southern states.
Welcome one and all, ladies and gentlemen, to Eagle Farm on Classic Stroke-Boat Day.
Timeless winter carnival classics like that wonderful sprint, the Stradbroke Handicap, the Blue Riband QTC Derby and the Brisbane Cup, already well over 50 years old, Queensland was very much an integral piece of the national racing fabric. Racing on the Darling Downs was flourishing, as was the embryonic career of a young horseman who would later make Toowoomba his home and achieve legendary status in every sense of the description.
Oh, well, it started off light when Amby and when I got out of the army. He had horses for me when I come home. Four, I think it was, and we started from there.
Organisers did a fine job.
Like many young men of his vintage, Atkins' fledgling career was interrupted when he was called up for national service duty during World War II. The war took a heavy toll on the racing industry, with Americans and Australians' occupation of both Doomben and Eagle Farm racecourses forcing industry officials to transfer metropolitan racing to the sand course at Albion Park.
When the Americans arrived in Australia, or in Brisbane, they closed both Doomben and Eagle Farm racecourses. Americans were camped here at Doomben, and all the racing went to Albion Park.
And the Yank troops loved the creek. Yes. The bookmakers loved the Yanks too, by the way. So did the girls. One of the stipulations was that they couldn't use any vehicles or even walk on the course proper. So they went across on the tracks and they stuck to the rules.
Upon completion of his service, Atkins turned his back on Brisbane in preference for the rural surrounds of Toowoomba, and his arrival into town was certainly achieved the hard way.
I bought 2, one for myself and one for another trainer here. That was, we got to Ipswich and we had to pick up another float and it never turned up. And Wally Douglas, the float driver, said, "You want to go back home?" I said, "No, I'll walk." So I walked he drove me to Rosewood and I walked from there to Helidon. And then I got a float to bring me up the range.
But JJ, as he's affectionately known throughout the industry, was far too determined to let a minor hiccup stand in the way of his dream. He quickly set about establishing one of Queensland's most successful racing stables.
I like the town, I like the facilities here, and I like the climate. I thought it was ideal, a lighter air, really, and I noticed a lot of the same trainers were here in Toowoomba. Alden Neal and that, he was our leading trainer. He'd win those 2-mile races in Brisbane, no trouble.
Another young man on the move, who would later make his mark on the racing industry, arrived in Brisbane from the reaches of North Queensland. Fred Best began his racing career as an amateur rider and then trainer in Townsville before he was lured to Brisbane by a local in champion jockey Neville Selwood. Best was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2007 and his resume featured 17 Brisbane Trainers Premierships and victory in almost every feature race on the Brisbane calendar with horses like Fort William, Booklink, Bengala Lad, Prince Meady's and Ergona.
Well, he only had one horse really, He bought a horse called All March down here in 1943, won the Cleveland Bay Handicap in Townsville. And then Neville Selwood had been living at our place. He had his 21st birthday there. And he'd come from Brisbane. He advised Dad to take the horse to Brisbane, which he did. And he left the rest of the family in Townsville. He was here for probably 18 months.
Best Senior wasn't the only member of his family creating a chapter in Brisbane racing. His son Noel followed him south to Brisbane from Townsville and quickly showed promise under his dad's tutelage, who had built a strong team of horses buying cast-offs from other trainers.
He bought horses that Mr. Athol Strong used to sell. He used to have his sales over here at Hendra every few months. And Dad bought a horse off him one time, and a horse called Chance Shot. Dad bought him in his own name, and he went on and he won a couple of races quick. And between him, me riding them and him training them, people sort of came into the place and wanted him to train a horse. And before long he was 30, 40 horses, you know, and he had a big establishment.
Within 2 seasons, Best was riding winners right, left and centre, but the competition in the jockeys' ranks in the 40s was fierce and largely dominated by 2 men whose names are frequently spoken when people talk about Australia's best ever jockeys. George Moore won the 1943 Brisbane Jockeys Premiership before he quickly was seconded to Sydney, where along with Neville Selwood, the pair established themselves as the nation's best jockeys.
Him and Georgie Moore were apprenticed together just over the back of this course in Long Street, and they both developed into the 2 best jockeys that I've ever seen. I mean, I've seen a lot of good jockeys, but they were young fellas, 10 years older than me, so I classed them as young fellas to follow, and I always followed them. Georgie Moore was the more tactician jockey. He'd try anything and get away with it. Selwood was more the polished jockey, but there was naught between them.
Moore dominated in Sydney, winning 10 consecutive premierships and every feature race, most multiple times on the Australian calendar, except for the nation's most famous race, the Melbourne Cup. With contrasting styles but peerless ability, Moore and Selwood, the apprentices who started their careers as nobodies in Hendra, went on to grace the hallowed turf of the world's most famous racecourses.
George, what was your greatest moment as a jockey?
Oh, I think winning English Derby, Wayne. You know, I'd failed a bit in Australia to win a couple of the big ones, and to go there, and I was pretty old at the time, you know. It was I was 44, and not many blokes, well, Scobie did, but not many chaps riding the Derby winner in England at 40-odd. So I was getting near the end of my career, and it was damn nice to be able to go there and ride such great horses as I did that year.
Epsom Downs, where the lure of the Derby drew close on 500,000 lovers of racing, to see if hot favourite Royal Palace would oblige his supporters and win the greatest flat race on earth. The going was perfect, firm but not hard, with plenty of grass. Conditions favoured the better class horses, the best of all, Royal Palace. Impossible here to predict the winner as the field approached Platinum Corner. As they swung round, the dream horse El Mighty had the lead, though good race readers noted that Australian jockey George Moore had Royal Palace nicely placed. In the last 2 furlongs, Royal Palace demonstrated his superclass, taking the lead on the inside, though challenged by the 22-1 Roboco, Lester Piggott in the saddle. It was now that George Moore proved that on this year's form, he is the world's greatest jockey. On the outside, Roboco couldn't catch Royal Palace as that great horse went on to win. That wonderful finish, with Royal Palace, as predicted, bringing home the odds, made it the most popular derby for years.
That was a great year in England. I won 3 of the biggest classics, and I was 2nd and 4th in the other 2, and then I rode other horses, good horses for Noel Merlis, you know.
Right. Probably the Ark also, I think. Yep.
Well, I won the Ark in 1959. Then I won the French Derby in 60 on a horse called Charlottesville. but and the Grand Prix de Paris and all those races, and a big race in Germany and that sort of thing. But I won a lot of the big ones over there.
Well, you gave a lot of Australians great thrills. There must have been one that stood out as far as
in
Australia. Tulloch,
I think old Tulloch, yeah. Winning the Brisbane Cup, you know, that was his last go, and he was getting desperate, you know.
George Moore's career would produce over 2,200 winners as a jockey before he went on to a stellar career as a trainer, culminating with his inclusion in the Sport Australia Hall of Fame in 1986. Neville Selwood's highlights were parallel with Moore's, including an English derby and topping 100 winners in a season in France before tragically losing his life in a race fall in 1962. Queensland's reputation as a prime nurturing ground for young riders was forged in the 40s and 50s, and names like Billy Briscoe, Noel Digger McGrowdy and Russell Maddock ensured the era qualified as one of the greatest times in Australian racing.
I asked Maddock one day why he was so good at the creek, and he said, well, on the bends, on the tight bends, I position myself in the saddle when I shift my balance as they do on motorbikes, on a motorbike. And he said, I think that contributed a fair bit to my success.
Another young hoop making a name for himself in Brisbane riding ranks burst into the scene, but Ron Conquest's link to an Australian equine galloping freak had already been forged. Ron's father Pompey trained plenty of winners over many years out of his Hendra stables, but it was one Byrne Maid, one of the slowest gallopers, who would eventually create national headlines, albeit indirectly.
He was training her, who was the dam of Burnborough. And Dad and himself and all the Bronco and my Uncle John and them, they all said she wasn't fast enough to run messages on. But she was good enough as a broodmare to throw Burnborough.
I used to come to the track with Burnborough every morning, practically every morning, and would work the horses there. And he was a magnificent animal, big, strong, could do anything. And he had a lot of trouble with the ownership, and he never got much of a chance when he was a young horse, when he would have been good.
What is your full name?
Albert Ernest Hadwin.
You live at?
Brisbane.
Regarding the purchase of this horse, when and from whom did you acquire Burnborough?
Jack Back, that is John R. Back, purchased him for me at the Winton sale.
And Back bought the dam and foal for you?
He bought the foal for me and he had the dam for himself.
What price did you pay for him?
I paid £140 for the youngster only.
How did you pay for this foal?
I paid by cash. To Jack Back, £140.
Did you get a receipt for the amount?
I did.
I suppose you can produce a receipt?
Yes, I can produce it. Here it is. I gave the Backs authority to purchase anything they thought would suit me, up to 100 guineas. But when they told me that this colt and his dam would cost a bit more, I agreed to pay the difference.
After hearing the evidence of Messrs A.E. Hadwin and Joseph Roberts, I find that A.E. Hadwin is the bona fide owner of the colt Burnborough by Embra, out of Burn Maid, branded ZA spur near shoulder.
Oh, he was a phenomenal horse. He could come home so quick in a race, you know, finish it off and carry big weights. I thought, you know, he was a great horse.
Burn Maid was reportedly 20 years old when she foaled the mighty Burnborough, arguably Australia's greatest racehorse, whose racing style of settling rearward and storming home captivated the heart and soul of the nation. The arrival of champion Toowoomba galloper Burnborough was a perfect tonic for the downhearted and disenchanted, war-weary population.
They brought him out there later on from the stalls to put him on the horse float, and there was the jockey, the trainer, and Mr. Romano, the owner. And the three of them came over there to see the horse get on the float safely. And I was there on my bike, and I put the bike there on the rail, and I said, Mr. Romano, could I pat your horse, please? And he said, yes, son, go ahead. And I got to reach up to pat him, and he seemed like he was 10 foot tall to me. You know, he was that big of a horse, and he'd just done what he'd done. And that stayed with me all my life.
Foldinoki, the Toowoomba Tornado, as is affectionately known, announced himself on the big stage when he came from a seemingly impossible position on the home turn to score an amazing win in the 1946 Doomben 10,000 and back up a week later to claim the Doomben Cup under 68.5 kilos.
Away they go. And the pace is on from the start. There's no finessing. They're going to make the favourite carry his big burden every inch of the way. But that doesn't worry backers of the champion. Fox Breeze forges to the front. And after going a furlong is lengths ahead of Pupham, Repshot, Wiseland and Tea Cake. Burnborough, with all his weight, is going easily towards the tail of the field. Only half a mile now, and Fox Breeze is still the leader. Burnborough on the inside is fourth, with a gap between him and the leaders. Mully begins to move through, but meets with interference, and he drops back. A groan goes up from the crowd. The champion's coming again. Mully pulls him to the outside, and he's moving up to the leaders, but still only fifth. Here he comes on the outside. In a few mighty strides, he's closed on the leaders, but for a moment seems to make no impression. Mully shows him the whip, but it's not needed. Burnborough knows what he can do. Just watch him do it. Mully stops riding yards from the post, and the champion accomplishes the impossible. Tea Cake second and Craigie third, but who cares? Burnborough won.
To think that we're sitting at the same racetrack as where Burnborough thundered down the straight here, coming from an impossible position to win the Doomben 10,000, with Mully out in the middle of the track storming home, and then a week later with 10 stone 12 on his back, winning the Doomben Cup.
There's nothing like the majesty and mystique of a champion racehorse to lure people, even those who aren't racing enthusiasts, to the track, and Burnborough had that X factor in spades.
The crowds were fantastic. Full house, every race meeting. 3 enclosures, paddock, ledger and the flat.
And they would fill the race course here, Doomben and the Creek on just ordinary Saturdays. Massive crowds. And I think nearly 400 bookmakers used to operate.
By the end of his racing career, Burnborough had well and truly put the Darling Downs on the national radar, and his record of 26 wins from 37 starts paved the way for him to become an inaugural inductee into the Australian Racing Hall of Fame. Racing was the unofficial sport of the nation, and crowds were back in force almost 2 years later to the day when an unlikely match race unfolded between two of Queensland's favourite sons in the 1948 Doomben 10,000.
All I can say is Murray Stream gave me the greatest ride of my life. I rode some good horses later in life, but Murray Stream at that stage, I hadn't turned 16, and Murray Stream gave me the ride of my life because we drew in the middle of the field. When we jumped away, I got pushed onto the fence in the first 100 yards, pushed onto the rails and back in the middle of the field. I was lucky there because from then on I was only following the rail. There was buffeting and interference up ahead, but I was just following the rail.
And Heroic Sovereign coming home well down the outside, and Murray Stream looking for the run, but he couldn't get through. 1 furlong to go, and Nestor, Heroic Sovereign throwing out a strong challenge, and Bradstock now takes his head in front of Nestor, and in the run of the judge, Bradstock, and Murray Stream flying on the outside. It's a great race to the post. I think Murray Stream might have just beaten Bradstock. I wouldn't like to pick it.
He took me on the ride of my life. He just went from, say, 12th to 8th to 6th, and we straightened up, and here I am poised to go out and chase the leaders. And he only got up in the last stride and beat Russell Maddock on Radstock.
Another teenager showing his more seasoned rivals that old age and treachery don't always overcome youth and skill was Deegan Hoop Norm Whopper Stevens. At just 15 years old, Whopper's services were already in huge demand, and he was constantly sought out by the leading trainers, as when he was ploughed through the Eagle Farm mud aboard Bally Vista to claim a big win in the 1948 Stradbroke Handicap.
I was only 15. At that time, Con Doyle was a very big trainer, having a lot of luck, trained a lot of winners, and I was his stable rider as well as George Ben's stable rider. A week before the Stradbroke was a pretty heavy track. He come down, he gave me the colours to ride in. I said, oh, righto. So when he came and he legged me on, he said, "This will win me 50 yards." I said to myself, "You're kidding, aren't you?" Anyway, he won by 50 yards, I'll tell you. And then the rain really set in, and they had to put the races off on the Saturday, and they held the races on the Monday, and I was sitting in the jockey's room, and I was sitting next to Moore and Selwood, and Selwood said to Moore, he said, "What do you reckon they'll run in this?" He says, "Pretty heavy." He said, "Oh, 115, he said. "If they run at 115, they'll win." I said, "I'm bloody certainly." I said, "I run a heavier track than this the other day, I run 13. Anyway, he won by 6 lengths.
Brisbane galloper Lucky Ring made the task look decisively easy when he became just the 5th horse to do it 1949 and 1950 when he was ridden by none other than Ron Conquest.
Yeah, I always call him a champion, horse Lucky Ring. And I rode him in the 49 Stradbroke, which he won, and I rode him in the 1950 Stradbroke, which he also won, and I also rode him in 51 when he ran second to Aquarius.
Within a few months I was riding here in Brisbane, and my first day riding in the metropolitan area I won the Group 1 Queensland Guineas on a horse called Countess.
With the higher prize money on offer interstate, it was becoming common practice for Brisbane trainers to venture south in search of those riches. And in 1951, the QTC Derby winner, Basher Velika, took on the big names in the spring. With former Brisbane boy Neville Selwood in the saddle, Basher Velika silenced his doubters when he beat Blue Vest and Davy Jones to win the 1951 Caulfield Cup.
I remember him walking into the back gate in Rouse Street, Hanra. And a funny thing about horses, you get entrenched with their look as soon as you see them, particularly good horses. It refers to good horses. And obviously Dad had a great opinion of him. First thing he did was take him straight into a box that he had reserved for him, and it was the biggest corner box in the stable. And I said, oh, this is going to be a good one.
And George Anderson said, "You know, son," he said, "one of these days this horse is going to win the Caulfield or Melbourne Cup." And I thought he was joking, so I walked into the jockey's room, told him all about what George Anderson said about the cup, so we all had a laugh.
While Jim Anderson and former champion jockey turned stipendiary steward Sid Fisher still marvelled at Basher Velika's extraordinary feats, the horse's biggest fan, his trainer, sadly passed away before the horse's greatest win in the 1951 Caulfield Cup. But although he wasn't there in person, George was there in spirit, and Basher Velika's connections instructed the horse's new trainer to prepare the horse exactly how the man who turned him into a champion had done.
He had a lot running for him, but he just made up ground from the top of the straight and went on to win decisively.
Bud Sinclair Sr. first shot to prominence as a leading rider in the 40s, when he rode with great success, including a Group 1 win in the 1940 Brisbane Cup on Tragopan. When he hung up his saddle and turned his hand to the training caper with a small but select string of horses, Sinclair quickly had the attention of the racing industry.
He had a lot of luck at training, but he was also obviously very good at it. He only ever had 12 or 14 horses. But in the first couple of years, he was given a horse called True Leader, which had won at 10,000 here, was past his best, but he patched him up and he won a couple of sprints with him. Then he had a very good horse called Galungan. He took to Melbourne with an Irish imported mare called My Sandra, and they raced well in Melbourne. And he really thought Galungan was going to be a Group 1 type horse, and he unfortunately developed travel sickness, similar problem that Tulloch had in his career, which Tulloch managed to battle through, but Galungan had to be put down. And then he came across a horse called Bindana, which was owned by Les Gallagher and Stuart Henderson, who are well known here in Queensland. Les Gallagher's son Peter later became chairman of the Queensland Turf Club. It's a great Queensland racing name. And Bindana there was something a bit freakish about him. He could win sprints. He's an Australasian record holder at 10.5 furlongs, which is 2,100 metres now.
As a former talented jockey, Sinclair could spot riding talent from 100 yards off. And when he cast his eye on a young scallywag by the name of Richard Darby McCarthy, he liked what he saw in the Aboriginal lad.
I bought my first pair of long trousers and I saw him going to the races. And I went to the race at Doomben it was. And so I walked up to the chap that was up with the saddle the horse up. I'm leaning over the rail like that, looking at him. He looked around and said, "G'day." I said, "G'day. How you going?" I said, "All right." He said, "You want a job?" I said, "I've got a job." He said, "You want to be a jockey?" I said, "I'm already a jockey."
McCarthy had that roguish streak in him that so many top-line jockeys possess. But he also had an abundance of untapped raw horsemanship talent.
I had my first ride at a place called Kilcoy, and he was my first winner, horse called Fine Verse, in '57. And then my first winner in the Metropolitan, I got my city licence soon after that. I would have been about 14 or 15 by the time I got the city. Was a horse called Rio Sands at Doomben.
Darby's rise was meteoric, and he quickly established himself as a magician in the saddle, riding many group and listed winners for various trainers. But one special moment came in the Stradbroke with Bart Sinclair Sr.
Undoubtedly his biggest win was the Stradbroke 1963, and it was a fantastic training performance. The horse had won the Lightning the year before, broke down and came back, and it was very difficult to train. He had leg problems. They actually trained him down at Crib Island Beach and Nudgee Beach.
He was very special to me, Malala, because of the work that I'd done with him and with Bart, us getting him ready. He finished up going to Sydney and winning the Craven A Stakes, and Moore rode him there. And he beat a mare called Birthday Card. She won a golden slipper Birthday Card. He was a very exciting horse, and he was extra special because of the injuries that he had occurred, and to overcome them as a 2-year-old and to go on and win such, the Group 1s like the Craven A and the Stratty.
In his last gallop on the Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock on Crib Island Beach, and he won the Stradbroke, beating a pretty good field, Sampson and Prunder and Kilsherry. It was a good field, and on a lead-up of one run, he won the biggest sprint in Queensland. So you'd have to say it was not only his biggest win, it was his best training performance.
Here's Malala with the white jacket, finishing fast under the whip. Close to the post, Malala gets the upper hand and wins from the fast-finishing Prunder with Sampson third.
Not a lot of Group 1 winning jockeys go on to be Group 1 winning trainers, particularly here in Queensland. It's hard to do. There's not as many Group 1 races, and with a small team, it's certainly a milestone achievement in Queensland.
The punt was pivotal to getting a quid in those days, and one of the master trainers at pulling off a big plunge was just starting to weave his magic. The late great Jim Griffiths was renowned for his deceptive and often unorthodox training methods, as he was for his uncanny ability to know when his horse was ready to win.
He had some outstanding horses. Golden Khan, I think, won a Brisbane Cup, and horses like Wine and Song. He was probably the best judge of a trainer that I've ever come across.
In the 50s and 60s, it was, Fred Best and Jim Griffiths were the two biggest trainers. Reg Rowley trained winners there. Jack Clayton came later, so it was an interesting experience just going to the track in the morning. The banter between everyone, and they usually had a fire going in winter, and they'd have a grass fire going in summer to chase the mozzies away. So there was always smoke around the scraping shed, as they call it, the 600 metres at Eagle Farm. But there were a lot of horses there, 600 or 700 horses.
If he said they'd win, they'd be unlucky if they got beat. No, he was an enormous judge.
Former champion jockey Mick Dittman, or the Enforcer as he was known during his record-breaking career, was stable jockey for the unstoppable Tommy Smith in Sydney for many years, but he rates Griffiths the equal to anyone he has ridden for.
Very smart trainer, I've seen him do some amazing things with horses, like just pull up and not work them for the last 2 and 3 days, that type of thing. But Jim was a pretty strict and stern sort of a man too, but he was very smart at his business. If you thought one of Jim's could win, even in your own mind, it used to run well. He was a great trainer.
While Griffiths was building a great record in the training ranks, a young, minuscule bloke with dreams bigger than himself was doing whatever he could to get a start in the racing game.
I went down to Kevin Young at Deegan, and I started with him. And I was only there about 3 months, and I was granted a licence to ride. And of course, it only took me, in actual fact, I was that small, they sent me home for 6 months to grow a bit. I only weighed 3 stone.
But Shoemaker's dreams of becoming a champion jockey far outweighed his tiny frame, and he quickly outgrew the Brisbane scene and transferred his adventures to Randwick trainer Dick Roden. And in 1958, with trainer Jack Green, they set out to capture the greatest staying test in Australia with a horse called Baystone.
We went to Mornington before the Hotham, run him in a trial there, and Jack said, don't win the trial, you know. So it was a mile trial, and I just let him go around about 6 deep. He still won. He had too much on him. Somebody said, came from Adelaide, they said, where'd you get that horse from, Jack? He said, oh, he's just an old jumper from over your way, you know. Anyway, on the Saturday he came out and won the Hotham Handicap. And he lined up and, well, Jack said to me, he said, don't hurt him in the Hotham. I've trained him for the Melbourne Cup. I want him Melbourne Cup Day on the Tuesday. You know. So I think there was a mare in the race called Doherty from Western Australia, and she was favourite. And of course I just jumped out and cruised on. In those days the Hotham was 1.5 miles. Now it's 2,000 metres. So I just cruised along, and he was going that easy after we straightened up. I thought I'd better do something on him, and I just pulled him out, and at the bell tower I let him go, and he beat Doherty about 5 lengths. He actually was never going to lose the cup from Chiquita Lodge, which is about 7 furlongs out, you know. And he was travelling that easy, and he just moved up through the field, and by the time we got to the home turn, there was White Hills, Red Pine, and something else there, I just can't remember its name, they led. And I trailed Monte Carlo up, and we straightened, and by the time we got down to the furlong, Jack Thompson had taken Monte Carlo to the front. It was favourite. And I just cruised up on the outside him at the bell tower. I let him go, and he went on to win the cup. So it wasn't bad.
Baystone gets the head in front of Monte Carlo, Red Pine third, and then White Hills from Yemen. But Baystone's finishing too well in the cup for Monte Carlo, and Baystone's going to win the Melbourne Cup.
Just 3 years later, the shoe would fall from his lofty heights, and his career was in tatters, thanks to a silly mistake and a breakthrough in technology. Another Queensland Racing Hall of Fame jockey who rode with great success across Australia and internationally had a less than glamorous start to his career. In 1957, at Gatton Racecourse, Graham Cook made one mistake he will never forget.
I went to a race meeting at Esk, out in the Brisbane Valley. I had my first ride on a little mare called Luann. About 3/4 of a furlong from the winning post, they have a jockey semaphore board which was inside the track. I mistook it for the winning post, and I stopped riding the filly, and obviously she got beaten, but I got my tail kicked.
That era was quickly erased when Cookie made his Metropolitan Racing debut with a big bang during the 1959 Winter Racing Carnival.
Second day riding, I rode 2 winners at Southport, and within a few months I was riding here in Brisbane, and my first day riding in the metropolitan area, I won the Group 1 Queensland Guineas on a horse called Countwood.
But bigger, much bigger accolades were to follow when Cook joined forces with that old master trainer Jim Griffiths during the 70s. Between them and their supporters, Cook and Griffiths sent plenty of bookmakers packing in a partnership that spanned well over a decade and was almost unbeatable at its peak, like they were during the 1975 Winter Carnival.
Yes, Perdido, trained by Jim Griffiths again. He won the Stradbroke Handicap. He was a back marker, and he come from about second last on the corner and weaved through the field, and he won very narrowly at the finish, but he won. And he went on his next start to win the Doomben 10,000 in the 1 year. I don't know of any other trainer-jockey combination that has won 3 of the major 4 races run in Queensland during the Winter Carnival, being the Stradbroke, Doomben 10,000 and Doomben Cup. Jim trained the horses, obviously. Spedito won the Stradbroke and 10,000, and Golden Khan won the Doomben Cup.
You thought he might have sat there and said, oh, well, we'll think about it for a week or something, you know, adjourn it for a week. But no, he just had life straight off the bat.
The honour roll of race callers who have so passionately described racing in Queensland to fans across this state and down the years reads like a who's who of broadcasters. The Southerners can boast about Bert Bryant and Ken Howard, but Brisbane callers such as Ron Anwin, Vince Curry, Keith Nowd, Wayne Wilson and Alan Thomas have played monumental roles in taking horse racing into the homes and hearts of thousands of Queenslanders.
Oh, gee, I'm not sure here. Sam the Flirt or Delzar? Yeah, I worked with Vince at 4BC for a number of years. Vince was a very good broadcaster, but Vince was just more than a race caller. He called Davis Cup. He went to Ohio, I think it was, and called the tennis. He was a very good boxing broadcaster. He called the fights at Festival Hall. He was a very full-rounded broadcaster as well as radio, as well as racing, but he was a very, very good race caller.
When I was a little boy going to Ferguson Park in Gladstone, I used to listen to Vince and listen to Ken Howard and Bert Bryant. They were the 3 guys that I grew up with and a lot of people grew up with, and they'd paint the pictures. And then in late 69, I had the opportunity of getting a job at 4BC in Brisbane, and Vince Curry was the race caller for 4BC. So for me, to meet my boyhood hero and to work alongside him and to have him as my mentor, to have him knock the rough edges of me, it was just a wonderful experience. You know, you're working with your hero.
Flyer, Gundy's son is into the clear, coming after Daddy's little girl, and here comes Battlefield. Battlefield is bounding down the outside, went straight past the leaders, and is bumping away to win easily. Battlefield by 3 lengths, Gundy's son second in a photo, third Daddy's little girl.
Curry's arrival in Brisbane from Toowoomba in the early 60s signalled the end of an era for one of the true champions of the Australian turf. Tulloch, the Sydney champion who had taken all before him in the southern states, before he was cruelly struck down with a severe case of travel sickness, had spent 2 years recovering before climbing off his deathbed.
Oh, no doubt the greatest horse I've ever seen was Tulloch. Just a freak horse.
Following a successful return to racing in Melbourne, his trainer Tommy Smith earmarked the 1961 Brisbane Cup as the great horse's last start, and the brave champion, with hometown hero George Moore in the saddle, delivered a farewell performance carrying a massive 63 kilograms. More than 33,000 people flocked to Eagle Farm to cheer their hero, and the victory left even the toughest of men, even TJ, in tears.
He just had the will to win. He won everything nearly he contested. He nearly died, for a period there of probably 6 months. He come back after 2 years away from the racetrack, and he beat a great horse, I think his name was Lord, in Melbourne, 10 furlongs first up, 2,000 metres first up, and probably just on courage they fought. They went the length of the straight head and head. Brisbane Cup this year, which was reduced in distance, I think Scenic shot at 59 kilos, but there wouldn't be a horse today carry 9 stone 12.
Just as the Black Champ departed, new technology that would revolutionise the way stewards and fans view racing was introduced. But did someone forget to tell jockey Mel Shoemaker? Approaching the finish line aboard Blue Era in a head-and-head battle in the 1961 AJC Derby, Shoemaker's determination overboiled when Tommy Hill edged past him on Summer Fair.
I let him run to the front. I thought he might have been home, because he just cruised to the front and he hadn't put a foot wrong, the horse. And next thing, we got down past the furlong, and I could hear this thing coming. By the time we got up alongside him, we were only about 70 yards out if we were that far. Only a few strides out anyway. And by this time we'd got right over alongside him, you know. And I just happened to put my hand out and Tommy ran into it, you know. I actually never grabbed him because I had the stick in the left hand, see. And I just locked him up with my wrist. And of course, then the last stride, I just took the hand away and pulled the stick on Blair and give him 1, 2, and he just put his head out and got the photo.
Returning to scale, Hill protested against Shoemaker's desperate stunt, and the head-on camera, in operation for the first time, would reveal who was telling the truth.
It was a hard decision to make because, well, Mel and I have always been good mates, and it was something that you had to think about, and you only got the time from the time you pull up till you get back to the steward's room.
We won't leave the protest, you know, because, well, nobody knew the head-on film was there. Anyway, we got into the room, showed the film, the side-on shot. You couldn't see anything. The Chief Steward, Frank Burke, he said, "Oh, we've got another shot, head-on shot." I said, "God, strike me." And it's from the bottom of the straight, and it's just black, nothing on it. Up until they got to about 4 strides from the winning post. The last 3 strides, here it is in black and white. What can't speak can't lie, can it? Well, what are you going to say? Sent us out of the room and came back, took the race off him, had me back in there, and he just said life. You thought he might have sat there and said, "Oh, well, we'll think about it for a week or something, you know, adjourn it for a week," but no, he just said life straight off the bat. You could have heard a pin drop. There was 80,000 people there. Not a sound when I walked off the track.
A stunning end to one of the greatest jockeys in the land, but all wasn't lost, as a Queen's pardon 5 years later paved the way for the Shoe's return to riding. After packing spuds during his time out, Mel returned as good as when he left, quickly returning to the pinnacle of racing, winning numerous feature races, before retiring with more than 2,000 winners to his name in 2001.
We in the racing industry, jockeys particular, we know a good rider when we're riding against one. And there are certain riders you'd get in the race with, and you knew you were in a race. You don't treat this person a second rater because he's not. He's number one. You're in a real dogfight here because this bloke can ride. And you certainly knew you were in a dogfight if you had Mel Shoemaker in your race with you.
Great praise indeed from one of the greatest jockeys of his time. Darby McCarthy took all before him during the 1960s, with wins in Brisbane's biggest races, and he is still the most successful jockey in Stradbroke handicap history, with 3 wins in the now Group 1. McCarthy then chanced his arm with limited success on the world stage, riding for one of the world's richest owners, Prince Ali Khan, in England and France.
No, I didn't have any success at all. I just had rides and I moved around. And I basically just enjoyed myself because my contract didn't work out. I rode a horse in a lead-up race for the Arc de Triomphe, a horse called Topio 2, in a mile and a quarter race at Longchamp. And it was owned by a woman called Madame Volterra, Susie Volterra. Their family introduced the singing sewing machine to the world. Mexi Pires was there, and he said, he was my interpreter. He said, he saw the run. And he said, "What do you think, mate?" I said, "Oh, dude, that was a good run." And tell this lady that it's got a great chance in the Arc. And I don't know what he told her, but he rode it. And he won it.
He returned to Sydney in 1969, just in time to achieve possibly his greatest feats in the saddle, winning the AJC Derby on Divide and Rule and the Epsom Handicap on Broker's Tip.
but it's the Byron Rules Derby by Concord, trying hard to get to him, and so too is Gallicus, but the Byron Rule is too good. The Byron Rule first, and then he's for second in the Derby.
George's in Black Onyx top weight in the Epsom, and I'm on Breaker's Tip, and I drew one alley. So I got the top of the straight, and I looked at, saw Roy Higgins on a horse called Alrello, and he had his foot in his mouth, and we locked arms, and we went to the post and hit the line, photo finish, and George ran the fourth on Black Onyx. He said, "We're even now, Darb." I said, "What, George?" He said, "You got me in the Derby." He said, "No," and he said, "Alrello beat you." He said, "I could see that Roy's horse in front of you." I said, "Okay." My number popped up on the screen as the winner, and it's ironic that they were on that race for 125 years. The history and the books are there, and there was 3 Queenslanders that won those races. Fred Sheehan, Mal Shoemaker and Darby McCarthy.
He was a character in himself. He'd stop and he wouldn't move until he was ready to go, and he'd just stand and fix his eyes up the straight on something.
Gunson never left a photographer in doubt. Is there one on the left, sir? There are 3 of them, he said to Mr. Higgins.
Racing at the Gold Coast, now home to the world-renowned Magic Millions race and sale series, dates back to the 1890s, when an occasional meeting was held in the old cane paddocks at Bundall, not far from the present site. After successfully merging with the Oxenford track, the Southport and District Amateur Turf Club was formed on the 15th of May 1946, and regular racing commenced on a sand track. In January 1971, the club started conducting racing every Saturday, and in August that year, the club launched the Newmarket Gold Coast Cup 3-day carnival with prize money for the main race totalling just $2,000. With its beachside location, the Gold Coast became the track where the turf meets the surf. Trainers such as Harold Norman and John Wallace were quickly drawn to the place.
Grass track was 7 months old. Jeff Fanning had just started here. He come from Orange. It was 7 months old, and we'd have a little shower of rain Friday night or something like that. The first race they'd run, and one would fall over on the corner. We'd switch to the sand. And you could just switch to the sand if you wanted to accept or scratch, well, it didn't matter. You didn't have to pay scratchings and anything like that. And, it used to be good.
I think it's unique that it's close to everything. Like, you're only half a mile off the middle of Surfers Paradise. You're not far off the beach. People can walk here, to go to the races. It's a good little fair track.
Every now and again they'd put a $1,000 race on. Christ, they'd get big noms. $1,000. They used to have in those days maidens, improvers, progressives, intermediates, and then they'd have 7th divisions and 8th divisions.
Well, he's back in a big way. But the trainers weren't the only industry players drawn by the coast's magnetic charm. Bookmakers like Chubby Holloway saw the potential, and with other big betting bookies like Terry Page occupying the rails, the Gold Coast was soon regarded as one of the strongest rings in the country.
Alan Hollandale, I think, is probably the best administrator in racing that I come across. He said to me, "Why don't you come to the coast?" The coast had all the big, some Laurie Bricknell, Terry Page. I had to spend 6 months in the outer ring before you could, you were eligible to go to the rails, which was fair. Anyway, I got to the rails in 6 months, and Alan Hollandale, the Magic Millions, was the first Magic Millions was coming up. And I think the average hold down there at that time from the biggest bookmaker would probably be 150,000. And I said to him, I'll hold $500,000. And he said, absolute rubbish. He said, you won't get anywhere near it. I think I held 490-something thousand.
They're off. He's missed it, Might and Power. He's come out at the tail of the field, would you believe? Jazzac from the inside was the first to go, and Quick Flick began quickly, followed by Vitaman and Summercrest. Might and Power's been stoked up by York. He's gone through to 4th spot. He'll get outside these horses in a moment and go up towards the lead. Broan on his outside from Summer Bow and Last Galactic Valley.
The day Might and Power won here, he won the Hollandale here, There was a huge crowd to see him. And he won easily that day.
Around the bend, 350 to go, and Mighton Power, he's a mile in front, turning for home. Mighton Power's out, 6 lengths to Quick Flick. Summer Bow on the outside is running home well, and then Vitaman, but it's all Mighton Power. York had a peep over the shoulder. He didn't get out of the gates all that well. It took him a while to get to the front, but he's 6, 7, 8 in front of Summer Bow. The crowd are going berserk here. Mighton Power, he's careered away. He's down, he won by a big margin. I reckon John Tapp was right.
For people from the Gold Coast to be able to come here, and I'll say this for Nick Morotis, he took him everywhere. And to bring him up to the Gold Coast and to Doomben and to bring him here, and they had, on a Wednesday afternoon, they had somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 people here on a Wednesday. And to watch him win and to watch him come back, and the aura that he had, and the crowd just loved him.
But the coast's shining light started with the inception of the Golden Nugget Yearling Sale Series by the late Carl Waugh to improve the breeding stock in Queensland. Backed by a number of breeders, Waugh purchased land from the Gold Coast Turf Club and linked with Jan Peacock to create the series, which was the world's first incentive sale race concept. The idea started with a bang, but was soon struggling to attract quality stock and wealthy buyers. And in 1985, Waugh and Peacock evolved the series into the Magic Millions, with the champion Gold Coast sprinter Snippets completing a fairy tale result by winning the first millions in 1987.
40, start him up by 40.
Under the guidance of esteemed bloodstock agent David Chester, the first Magic Millions sale attracted unforeseen interest from all sections of the racing industry.
In those days it was just an Australian sale for $1 million race the following year, and leading into the sale, more and more people ringing up wanting catalogues and whatever, and I think from memory we ran out of catalogues. So there were 200 horses catalogued and there were 20 reserves, and I still remember the people that were on the reserve list ringing every single day, has there been a scratching, can I get my horse in? That was the sort of frenzy it created, this very first sale. The following year, when we had the first race, no one had any idea what was going to happen, and the Gold Coast Turf Club, they were taken completely by surprise. I still remember a queue of people that would have stretched probably 1.5 kilometres, 2 kilometres to get in through the turnstiles, because no one knew what was going to happen. It was probably the biggest crowd ever seen at the Gold Coast Turf Club, because it was just such a novel idea. There'd never been $1 million race in Queensland before, or anything like it. I think in those days, probably the richest race in Queensland was about $200,000. So it was, it was a big event.
Retail mogul Jerry Harvey, advertising king John Singleton, and executive banker Rob Ferguson took control of the Magic Millions in 1997, and the sale has gone from strength to strength.
Up until then, we'd been run by people who've been in the industry all their lives. Both Jerry, Singo and Rob all think outside the square. They've come up with some really great concepts. The race has gone now to a $2 million two-year-old race. We have a world first in the Magic Million Super Saturday in January. Every race on the program's now only eligible for Magic Million graduates. It's nearly $5 million in prize money. It's one of the biggest race days in the world. Just little things like that, that they've introduced, which has really helped the business.
The Magic Millions, they talk about moving it or something like that. It would not work anywhere but the Gold Coast. It's January, it's a holiday place of Australia. It's where all the people is in January. It's not interfering with any other carnivals, and the sales and the race goes off good. It wouldn't work anywhere else only the Gold Coast.
The Magic Millions does belong on the Gold Coast. I don't think it would work anywhere else, and I think Jerry Harvey and John Singleton are aware of that. You can take it somewhere and you can take the sales and you probably get more money for your horses. They did take the 3-year-old race to Sydney one year, and I don't think it was very successful. It's born and bred for the Gold Coast. All the powers that be have to do is find a way to make it happen, give it security, give it longevity, and leave it here. You tell me anywhere in the world that you would go to a sale and buy $1 million horse and wear a Billabong T-shirt and board shorts and sandals and sit down and drink French champagne. It doesn't happen.
The Queensland Racing Hall of Fame is a special place for the special people and horses that have helped make horse racing in this state the envy of racing centres across the world. Del Rello, the 2009 equine inductee who proved himself one of the best milers in the country during the mid-70s when he won 18 races, including 4 Group 1 victories in the AJC Doncaster Handicap, the George Ryder Stakes of 1400 metres, and consecutive wins in the 1976 and 1977 1600 metre all-age stakes.
Imagine coming from a little country base like Toowoomba and taking your Just Nows and your Del Rellos and your Grey Affairs to win races like the Oaks and the Doncaster and the Chipping Norton and the Turnbull, you know, and she might have won a Melbourne Cup too just now, but for a wet track. She was hopeless on rain-affected going. So that's a wonderful effort to come from a little country base like that and go down and mix it with those big-name trainers, the Bart Cummings of this world and the TJ Smiths. Like, they've got every facility and they've got access to any horse that they want. But these guys up here, they've got to do it tough. They've got to pick up the horses. They've got to pick up the right horses. Then they've got to develop the horses. Then they've got to travel them. It's a great effort.
Oh, well, I think, to take a lot of horses there. The trainers would take one now and then, but I used to do all the carnivals when I started back in the... I think I started going down there in 1969, and I had runners there for well into the next 16 or 17 years.
In being inducted to the Hall of Fame, Del Rello joined that man, J.J. Atkins, the man who trained him out of his Toowoomba stables and still regards the horse as the best he has put the polish on.
I went to the sale. I knew Alan Murdoch, who bred him very well, and he kept asking me, he said, "You want to buy this horse?" He said, "He's going to be a good horse." And anyway, I took a fellow down with me to buy him, and was sitting there, and he got interested in another horse, and he said, "Well, forget about him." So I come home without him. Del Rello, I never bought him. I didn't even know who bought him. And that night when I got home, I get a phone call from an old gambler. He said, "I bought a horse to the sale, will you train him for me?" Del Rello. I was meant to get him. Yeah, I just meant to get him, apparently. And he was a great owner, and Darryl Gollan went in with him, and they were great people to train for. He had his first start here. He was a big gangly fellow, not much meat on him or anything, and he developed very quickly, and he ran third in the maiden here, 2-year-old. I was looking to Brisbane, and he bolted him, and he never looked back. He was big and strong and tried his heart out. He's really great horse, Del Rello. And especially a mile. A mile at Randwick, he took a bit of beating. He's very good there. He ran a record in the Doncaster when he won it, and he won a weight for age record in the all-age stakes when he won it.
About a decade later, JJ was still training city winners, but it had been a while since he had a true top liner in his care. That was until a little filly by champion Toowoomba stallion Semi Palatinsk came along. Just now, the bonny grey filly with a heart as big as herself put JJ's name back under the national spotlight when she raced away with the 1986 AJC Oaks at Randwick.
So I leased her from Eureka Stud for a very good friend of mine, Ronnie Archer, and we had a great time with her. She won in Melbourne, she won in Sydney, and won in Brisbane. Only small, little filly, but a real big heart.
Another grey galloper with a heart as big as himself was the horse the nation came to know as the Gundawindi Grey, Gun Sin.
No matter where you go, they will ask you, As you say, from Gundawindi, so you're from Gunsin country, you know. Like, he's the greatest icon you could ever have.
I think it's probably one of the great Australian stories because it proves that dreams can come true. Like four blokes in a pub, the Old Vic pub, decide to buy a horse. Probably, well, when they buy a horse, you hope it's going to win Melbourne Cups and everything, but in reality, they would have settled to win a race out here on the Gundawindi track. And it's ended up, he's taken them all around Australia, ended up the greatest stake winner in his era, and we did the figures a few months ago, and it's around about 10 million it'd be worth today if he won the same races. So.
The story behind the ownership of Gunsynd reads like something straight out of a Hollywood movie script. Gundawindi local, Winks McMicking, had purchased the grey son of Sunset Ewe, but he soon realised he needed some outside financial help to sustain the horse's training, and set about establishing a syndicate.
So he walked in, there used to be a bar in the Victor, they used to call it Tory Bar or the Cattleman's Bar, whatever you like to call it, and there happened to be Jay the Tory, Bill Bishop and George in there. So after a couple of days discussion and working out a few things, they formed the Gundawindi Syndicate, hence the name Gunsynd.
His first run in a race, there was a horse called Instanta, and it won all its trials by about 10 or 12 lengths. It was unbeatable, they said. It was 7-2 on. And I always said, Gunsynd, nothing was unbeatable to Gunsynd. And he was back near last when they straightened up, and he just went whoosh and just swamped them, one running away. And he won his first 6 races in a row.
Another Queensland Racing Hall of Famer, Melbourne Cup winning jockey Larry Olsen, developed a very successful relationship with Gunsynd, but the champion Hoop has mixed memories of the grey flash after the horse was transferred south.
He's 4 lengths in front of Tordo, Levy and Eleazar, and behind them Sky Core, but Gunsynd's won by 6 lengths to Tordo.
Yeah, I won 6 races on Gunsynd. I won on him here and then went down south and won a couple of races on him there, but of course I lost the ride on him later when Tommy Smith got the horse, and I rode Gunsynd for the first time with Tommy Smith, but then he didn't want me on, so but there I lost the ride,
One of the most courageous and charismatic horses to ever race in Australia, Gunsynd was originally trained at Eagle Farm by Bill Wheelow, before being transferred to Tommy Smith in Sydney. A true performer who would pose for the adoring crowds on his way up to race. Gunsynd's feature wins include the Epsom Handicap, Doncaster Handicap, WS Cox Plate and the Toorak Handicap. And the announcement of his retirement devastated racegoers Australia-wide.
It's Gunsynd in front with Allshot coming at him from Montefiore. Gunsynd's under the whip, but he's holding Allshot. Allshot trying hard, but the great grey Gunsynd in front, he's too good. What a champion, the crowd roars and Gunsynd wins a length to Allshot.
She's the only horse, and still is, to win the 4 big mile races in the 1 year, and all under crushing weights. He's the only horse to ever win on every racetrack on the eastern seaboard of Australia. Eagle Farm, Doomben, Randwick, Canterbury, Rose Hill, Flemington, he won on every track.
He was a character in himself. He'd stop and he wouldn't move until he was ready to go, and he'd just stand and fix his eyes up the straight on something. And
Gunsynd never left a photographer in doubt. Is there one on the left, sir? There are 3 of them, he said to Mr. Higgins. Maybe there's one on the right. That is my best angle, sir. The other horses became impatient, but Gunsynd was not to be hurried. This was his final day. And the Hollywood film star posed again for people lining the fence just before stepping onto the track. Clerk of the course hurries Gunsynd along as the minutes tick by. Mr. Higgins, says Gunsynd, have we missed one? Yes, we have. There's a gentleman on the right with a camera. This is the last one.
He had a bit of character about him, that horse. He really played up to the crowd, as did Roy Higgins when he rode him. He would let the horse stop and show off. And so, I think Gunsynd, he was a crowd favourite because of his colouring, the grey horse, because he came from Queensland and went to Sydney and Melbourne and conquered the best. So it was a romantic story, Gunsynd.
The last Queen Elizabeth Stakes she raced, all the women were crying. And even some of the blokes had tears in their eyes because the champion was leaving Victoria. They just loved him. They just took to him. Not only because he raced, but his will to win and everything. But the little characteristics he had, posing for sodas and all these people just loved him.
In the middle, Gunsynder starting to wind up. You can see the pressure in which this great Gunsynd was asked. He's giving all he's got. This is his last race in Victoria. He'll go on and win at great expense though. And Gunsynd on the outside, getting the upper hand from Battleground, Altai Khan's. He gets a tremendous welcome from his owners, Mr. Bishop, Mr. Cooney, Mr. Pipoff and Mr. McMicking, as they return to scale, each having hold of the rein. Big crowd gives Gunsynd...
But it was his return to Brisbane for a farewell exhibition gallop at Doomben in 1973 when the people really came to pay homage to the grey horse they had fallen in love with. With his regular rider Roy Higgins in the saddle, Gunsynd posed for the cameras and bowed for the crowd on a day many people regard as a landmark in Brisbane racing.
At this very track, on Labor Day, he drew something like 32,000 people to Doomben. I don't know where they fit it in. They were on roofs, they were sitting on the fences. Roy Higgins came here and rode him in a display down the home straight. And they cheered him and they cheered him and he came back into the enclosure. That is one of the great days of Queensland racing, the day that we saw Gunsynd.
I'm not saying he's the greatest horse of all time, but just the character and the charisma, and you actually had to live in that era just to know what it was like. There's up in an article from the paper there where a nun prayed for him every day. It said a little 5-minute prayer for racehorse.
We cheered him from the grandstand and we cheered him from the flat. We've cheered a little beauty, a real aristocrat. He's never thrown the towel in, been a tryout all the way. A horse we're really proud of, the gun to Windy Grey.
But with the retirement of one champion came the emergence of another, although this one was from Rockhampton and had 2 legs instead of 4. Leonard Ross Dittman, or Mick as he preferred to be called, started slowly. But with the support of the leading local trainers like Roy Dawson, Jim Griffiths and JJ Atkins, he soon took over the Brisbane riding ranks during the 1970s.
Well, when I first was licensed, I was here in Queensland, but they only gave me what they call a C-class licence, which didn't allow me to ride in the provincials, which meant Gold Coast or Ipswich or Laidley and those places. I had to go over the border. So my first meeting was Moorlambar, and I went there and I rode a double first day, but I was so tiny and I was so inexperienced, I didn't know where I was. They just used to run for me, you know.
I didn't see enough of Georgie Moore, but I put them on the same level, G. Moore and L. Dittman. Mick was more my age, and I was sort of calling him throughout his career here in Brisbane. Very strong man in the saddle, thinking jockey. He was a wonderful rider, almost the complete rider. Looked a bit awkward at times, I guess. You know, the true professional, or you might say his technique wasn't that good, but it was effective.
Well, when I first moved from the Gold Coast to Brisbane, I linked up with Roy Dawson and Jim Griffiths, and I wasn't leading rider for either of those, but they were 2 very influential trainers from Brisbane that used to put me on a lot and get me going. And then, of course, I had Jimmy Atkins from Toowoomba, who he didn't have a stable rider either, and he was extremely influential in my success.
After winning 5 Brisbane Jockeys Premierships, by the time he was in his early 30s, Mick took the advice of another legendary hoop and, like his predecessors in Moore and Selwood, headed to Sydney to ride for the unstoppable Tommy Smith. With his punishing whip action and fierce will to win, Mick Dittman would go on to become one of the world's great jockeys, with wins in almost every feature race on the eastern seaboard.
Red Anchor coming at deal. Now Victory Prince is putting in the strong burst down the middle of the track, and Fair Verdict is running on well. Victory Prince takes the lead from Red Anchor on the inside, and Fair Verdict, the 3 of them knuckle down to battle it out. Victory Prince coming at Red Anchor, and Fair Verdict on the outside, hammer and tongs. Red Anchor kicked again and won the Champagne.
You know, everybody looked up to George Moore, like he just had the trademark name, and he came to Queensland a few times and you'd speak to him. You know, he was just such a knowledgeable guy as far as the racing was concerned.
he was the person who actually got me to go to Sydney, that got me to venture interstate, because you know, I was still locked up in Brisbane till I was the age of about 32, 33. I should have been in Sydney in those places when I was 21, you know, looking back. And he always used to say to me, well, you know, you'll finish a nobody if you sit around here. You've got to get out and get into the rest of the world. And he was right.
How are you settling in Sydney?
Pretty good. It takes a little while to get used to things, but I'm getting to like it. It's quite good.
Brisbane's always been your favourite city.
Well, I very much enjoy living here, but, you know, racing's my business, and you know, I'm in Sydney at the moment, so I've got to stay there.
And that's the big-time business in Sydney.
Racing's first class there, first class.
He got into a bit of trouble early. This Port Carling came out of fraction. Bianco Lady away nicely with LAB's U over on the fences. Noble Comment.
His ride to win the 1982 Melbourne Cup aboard the Jeff Murphy-trained Gurner's Lane made him somewhat of an unpopular hero, but it ranks as one of the truly great performances in the race that stops the nation. Just when the punters' pin-up horse Kingston Town was being hailed the winner, Dittman drove the baldy-faced Gurner's Lane along the Flemington Straight to record what he rates as one of his favourite moments in racing.
Boy, he's slowly easing across. Behind them came Rose and Thistle.
Melbourne Cup was a fantastic time, because you're always wanting to win a Melbourne Cup, and I'd sort of formed a bit of a relationship with Jeff Murphy, and he had Grosvenor at the time. I'd won a few Group 1s on Grosvenor, and Gurner's Lane was a good stayer, and he'd won the Caulfield Cup. I'd missed the Caulfield Cup ride on him because I was suspended. I was to ride him, and Brent Thompson rode him on a mud track. But then I was also booked for the Melbourne Cup, so I got back on him, and you know, he looked a great chance in the race, and then he came out and drew 23 alley, which wasn't a great concern because he was a back marker, but we made a bit of a plan to sort of miss the start on him, drop over the fence and try and sort of get in front of a few by the time we got to the winning post.
And they're followed by Amaranth making some ground. Silver Bounties on the outside of Mr. Digby. They're followed by Gurner's Lane, Barmax, Magistrate, My Sir Avon, Dealer's Choice. And the rank outside of Toharu's the trailer. They're coming down towards the 800 crossing just prior to making the turn, and it's Brewery Boy in front again by a half length on Carring Bush. Noble Comment is coming around them swiftly with Gala Mascot, and on the outside of them is Kingston Town living up to them very deep on the track.
Well, he got a break, Kingston Town. He probably got 2.5 lengths in front of the field, and I was still back 6 or 8 lengths off him coming through. So I was worried that I wasn't going to pick him up, and I was still tromping home pretty good, but at the finish I was sort of coming to the end of my run too, because I think Kingston Town had 59 kilos and I think I might have 56. So Kingston Town done an enormous job, you know.
Kingston Town's in front, Port Carling's getting through with Noble Comment, and here's Gurner's Lane driving through on the inside. The Kingston's in front, but Gurner's Lane is going to him. Gurner's Lane after Kingston Town. Gurner's Lane goes home too well and beats Kingston Town. Noble Comment ran third.
Dittman rode many champions throughout his career, but there's one horse he regards as superior to any other animal he rode: Red Anchor.
But Red Anchor Dittman went for home. He shot 2 in front of the 200 from Star Pyramid, getting out Lord of Camelot and then Street Cafe. But Red Anchor's going to walk in, scores by 4 lengths.
I was unbeaten on Red Anchor. I think I had 9 for 9 with him, and he's the only horse I've ever ridden that could win a Newmarket and a Melbourne Cup. He could do it both. He couldn't get into the Melbourne Cup in those years because it wasn't an automatic entry for the Derby winner. They changed that later. But Tommy would have run him in the Cup if he could have got him in. He would have won by a minute. The further he went, the better he was. He had the sprint of a 6 furlong horse at the end of 2 miles. He was a good horse.
2 lengths to Luxolotria, half to Red Anchor moving up on the outside. National Gallery's got up behind it now from Clovelly Bay, still last into the straight Spirit of Kingston.
When I rode him in the Derby, that's the furthest he'd ever gone as a 3-year-old. That was 2,500 metres. And, you know, he got a beautiful run back, 4th or 5th, but he was about 4 or 5 lengths off the horses in front of him. And a good speed in the race. When he got to the crossing at the half mile at Flemington, I could feel him on the bit say, well, come on, we better get going. You don't see that with too many horses. He said, come on, we just better get a bit closer.
Look at him go. Red Anchor racing away, 4, 5, 6 in front of National Gallery. Then Clovelly Bay and Gold Deck. But little Red Anchor's going to trot in the Derby. Wins pulling up by 4.5 lengths to National Gallery.
While Dittman dominated his male counterparts, a lady rider, hell-bent on paving the way for her female colleagues, made people across the nation sit up and take notice. The groundbreaking Pam O'Neill may not have ridden a Melbourne Cup winner like Dittman, but she sure made it easier for the following generations of women jockeys to get a start in racing.
I started to ride work at Eagle Farm, and for me to ride work, I had to ride in front of a steward to see if I was capable of riding work. Anyhow, he let me ride work, and then I eventuated to a jump out, and I was the first female ever to ride in jump outs, and that's like barrier practice. I'll never forget it. My stepfather put a horse in, and Billy Clark was one of the jockeys in there. You'd swear I was in a race. Anyhow, I won the jump out, but you swear I was in the Melbourne Cup. They were all yahooing, and it was a real thrill that I had the support of all the male counterparts behind me.
O'Neill's desire to be licensed was further heightened when New Zealand jockey Linda Jones became the first woman to ride in Australia when she made her Brisbane debut at Doomben.
Yeah, I had to do 10 barrier trials before they'd give me my licence, so I did them all in one day. I was determined that nothing was going to deter me, seeing I was getting this close. So I did the 10, and in the meantime, Linda had come over here, and look, the longer I think about it, the more I sort of get, not upset, I just sort of thought, well, I would have been nice to be the first female jockey in Australia, but Linda had come over, and she rode a horse called Pay the Purple in the Doomben Cup, and I lent her my saddle to ride in, and I had to stand in the enclosure and watch, you know, and I used to think, the more I think of it, I think, geez, you know, I would have liked to have been the first. It didn't worry me at the time because I wanted to get going. About 2 weeks later, they handed me my licence. I was brought into the game, wasn't allowed to be an apprentice, where Linda had a full kilo allowance. They gave her a full kilo, where I had to come in and ride against the Dittmans and the Cooks on equal ground. So I think they thought I wasn't going to be around for long, but I stayed around for a fair while.
But O'Neill would soon be matching strides with the best male jockeys in Brisbane, and her first day in the saddle at the Gold Coast made headlines across the nation.
The pressure on me was enormous because I thought I'd been shooting my mouth off for years, here it is. And anyhow, I come out and I rode 2 winners, and then I said, how long's this been going on? Then I come out and rode another one. So I rode 3 winners my first day, and it was supposed to be a world record, anybody riding professionally their first day to have ridden 3 winners. So it was a lovely ending.
By the time she retired, the iconic Pam O'Neill would ride more than 400 winners, and current women jockeys like Cherie Drake remain eternally grateful for the undying perseverance and determination she displayed in opening the door for female jockeys across the nation. The touchscreens found in today's TABs were still many years away in 1979, but modern technology was already starting to play a big part in the wagering model used in Brisbane betting rings. Computerised sell-pay wagering system was introduced, and although the cumbersome machine was so big its mobile home was the back of a semi-trailer, its ability to calculate new betting types and provide fluctuations across trackside televisions and metropolitan racecourses captured punters' imaginations.
From the reports generated by the system in the first 28 days of operation, the turnover increased 85% overall. It provided the ability for pre-selling on races that had not yet run on the local venue, and it also provided for betting on other venues. It also provided for additional pools like Quinella, Forecast, Trifecta, Treble. Then it could generate reports, which its predecessor could not, management reports, operations reports, engineering reports, and intercession reports. So there was a lot of additional information that was available.
While the mobile totalisator was clearly here to stay, it did endure some hairy incidents as it was transported to metropolitan race meetings across southeast Queensland.
The primary movers not only moved the computer trailers from track to track, they also moved the Rolls-Royce standby generators. And in transit, bringing one of these generators back from Ipswich to the metropolitan area, one of the technical staff in the prime mover turned to the other who was driving and announced, "Isn't that our generator passing us?" A weld had failed in the coupling. And then on another occasion, one of the technical staff was driving the semi-trailer and transporting the computer trailer from one track to another. And the prime mover suffered a tail shaft failure. He pulled over to the side of the road and ran into a nearby pub to call for assistance. Yes, long before the mobile phone. When he came out, he was greeted by an elderly gentleman who was waving a stick at him in the air, shouting, "Hey, Sonny, was that your semi I saw rolling down the road?" And it was nowhere in sight.
Fine Cotton and Harbour Gold. Fine Cotton's in front. They're drawing to the line. He's just in front. Fine Cotton, Harbour Gold, lunge right on.
It could become quite evident that, he'd been painted with paint and it was starting to melt with the sweat and everything. So they took about another 10 minutes and he was disqualified.
Through the marvellous deeds of our horses, jockeys and trainers, Queensland racing was firmly established on the national scene by the time the 80s arrived. But there was a smallish bay stallion from Hendra that captured everyone's imagination.
Probably wasn't the most easiest horse to handle. He wasn't overly big, he was small, but geez, he had a lot of spirit, I tell you that.
In a barrier trial over at Ascot, I'd only hunt him down the run a couple of times in jump outs and that, and he showed he'd do something. So I put Shoemaker on him in a barrier trial, and he's just lobbing along in his last, and Shoe decided to give him a dig in the ribs, and 2 bounds he hit the front.
From a roguish yearling in his old wooden Hendra stable to a star on the world's most prestigious racetracks, Strawberry was truly a once-in-a-lifetime horse for everyone involved with him. Strawberry's march to international acclaim started with a win in the rich Queensland Maiden at Eagle Farm in August 1982. And following a spell, he built a picket fence with 4 consecutive wins in Brisbane. With his son and right-hand man Dan stating his case, Begor quickly realised he had a Derby horse on his hands, and in Sydney the following autumn, Strawberry Road justified the opinion his wily old trainer always had of him.
I said to Dad, I said, "I don't know how good he is." He goes good. He said, I'm thinking of taking him to the AJC Derby. I said, well, anything's possible, just with natural improvement. So he come back his next prep. I think he won 5 here straight, and then he went to Sydney and run second in the Hobartville behind Masquet, and I think Veloso run 3rd.
He's terribly unlucky. He jumped out and he led, and of course Morris Lowe never knew the horse, and of course he let him run round him. Of course when they run round him, coming to the turn, well, they pushed him right back, and had he gotten a clear run about 10 strides sooner, there were no Masquet.
Dougie was he always had a huge opinion of Strawberry Road, and of course away he went. And I watched his career, fairly closely because I wanted to get on him early. He already had a rider riding him here. Mel Shoemaker rode him early, and then Billy Cullen got on him and rode him, and then he took Billy Cullen to Sydney, and he was quite unluckily beaten quite a few times, 2 or 3 good races. And I wanted to get on him then because I knew he was pretty good.
A length of Veloso popped the question, and about 3 or 4 then to
With Dipman in the saddle, Strawberry Road bounced back to trounce his rivals in the Rosehill Guineas and then backed up to win the AJC Derby.
But Strawberry Road, he's going great guns. Veloso making no impression on him, and the Queensland combination of L, Dipman and Strawberry Road are absolutely donkey-licking their rivals. Veloso second, a minute away third.
After recording 10 wins for the season, including 3 in Group 1 races, Strawberry Road was named Australia's champion racehorse for the 1982-1983 season. But the best was yet to come, albeit belatedly.
His lead-up run to the Cox Plate, which was at Caulfield in the 2,000-metre race, I think it was Yalumba or something like that. And, he ran 6th, but he just probably wasn't 100% on the day, and although he didn't get beaten far, it was just on face value, it was a little bit disappointing, but The week leading up to the Cox Plate, like, his work was outstanding, and I said to Dad, I said, he's right back on track now.
Strawberry Road trying to get out of a pocket. Here's Sadappa, hooked 4 or 5 wide with Mr. McGinty. 2 to Tresaro, LA Bijou, Albany Bay. Emancipation's last on the corner. Fine Offer and Handsome Seattle. Mr. McGinty and Sir Dapper and Strawberry Road, they're all out and after the leaders on the corner now. It's Strawberry Road dashing to the lead from Fine Offer. Then Mr. McGinty beaten from Sir Dapper, but Strawberry Road, my goodness, he's a different horse today. He's going to walk in. Kiwi Slave coming from last, going to run second. Strawberry Road's won it by 4 lengths. Second, Kiwi Slave. Third, Mr. McGinty. Fourth, Handsome.
Advertising guru and Magic Millions Supremo John Singleton then purchased part of the Strawberry Road phenomenon, and with a controlling share, sent the horse on a world mission that he dreamed would culminate in victory in the Arc de Triomphe in France. Under a very questionable ride by local jockey Greville Starkey, Strawberry Road finished unplaced in the Arc before he ventured to America, where he recorded his last feature win in California at Santa Anita Park in 1986, before he became a champion sire based on the bluegrass of Kentucky, where he sired multiple Group 1 winners all over the world. Mount Isa has given the world many sporting greats over the years, including golfing great Greg Norman and former tennis ace Pat Rafter. But the small mining town was also the former stomping ground of one of Queensland's greatest ever horse trainers.
Back in the early 70s, I was a bookies clerk for one of the bigger bookies here, Marshall Boyd, a great guy and a great bookie. And a local policeman came and approached Marshall and said, I want to be a trainer, and would you trust me with a couple of horses? And Marshall had a couple of slow horses he thought he'd trust him with, so he gave him these couple of horses to train, and that was the start of the career of the great Bruce McLaughlin.
He would never abide by the rules, and as he said, he was never going to become commissioner, so he decided that, I'll train these horses.
I was sort of running parallel with him as far as my involvement in the media. When Bruce first came on the scene, he'd only been training a couple of years when I started in the media, and so I watched his development with great interest and followed it closely, and he was a mate. But to come from training a couple of horses at Crib Island to establishing Thornhill Park, and then, as in recent times, based at Corbell Park, but boy, he'd been gambled big time with his business. I don't see Bruce as ever being a punter per se, but a gambler with his business. He invested in himself. He had a go.
From his humble beginnings, McLaughlin went on to win 16 Brisbane Trainers Premierships and train a host of Group 1 winners in some of Australia's biggest races before his death in June 2009. It was in Mount Isa that Bruce met his wife Lorraine, and before long he made his way south to set up shop at Crib Island and then on to Ipswich, before he finally started to make his real mark when he established his Hendra stables in the early 1970s.
Very good judge of yearlings, Dad. That's probably one of his strong points. He could look at a horse and vision. With most things in his life, he's a man of vision. He walked onto a property at Thornhill Park and it was just a cow paddocks, and he said this will be a great place to build a training setup. Everyone said, well, he's gone mad, including us. And he built probably the greatest showpiece. It's like that with yearlings, but he could walk into a sale, see him in a sale ring, and he'd say, mate, 12 months' time, and I'd think, nah. But 9 times out of 10, he'd be right.
Never afraid to back his own ability, McLaughlin then surprised everyone when in the mid-80s, with his Eagle Farm stables full of top horses, he announced he was moving to Caboolture, where he established Thornhill Park, his own private training centre.
I haven't seen anything any better than it, and a lot of trainers that have seen it from the south in England claim it's as good as they've seen, so I suppose it's not really for me to say. It's everyone likes what they've got themselves, but it's for other people to decide that.
McLaughlin took time to adjust his training styles to the new world-class facility, but once he devised his formulas, big race winners started to flow like the Brisbane River.
Inside the 250, Heavenly View goes up on the outside of Rise and Shine. Still Rise and Shine a half in front. The grey coming at it now. Heavenly View goes to the front. Planet Ruler out of the ground. He'll beat them. Planet Ruler gets through in the middle, and Planet Ruler wins, and what a run.
Planet Ruler, I remember him winning his maiden, and Bruce telling me he'd go on and win the Guineas and probably win the Stradbroke. Well, he was half right. He went on and won the Queensland Guineas. And finished third in the Stradbroke that year. That was another example of McLaughlin's great knack of being able to place horses. He found the right races for him right throughout his career.
Planet Ruler, he was probably one of Dad's favourite horses. St Jude, With Me, Chortle. I think between them 4 horses, they won about 18 Group 1s.
Centro and St Jude. Stradmore can't go on at the moment, followed by Lord Revener. St Jude hit the front, 150 out, and the little horse shot clear. St Jude has raced away from Be Happy, followed by Centro and Stradmore, but it's all St Jude in the last bit. He's careering away and he wins the Guineas in it.
Loyalty was a word high of extreme importance in McLaughlin's mind, and time and again throughout his illustrious career, Bruce demonstrated he was truly a man of his word.
One of the owners of Planet Ruler wanted to sack Brian York as the jockey. Brian was Bruce's stable jockey, and Bruce's response was, sack the jockey, take the horse. Now, he developed the horse into one of the best sprinters in Australia, but he was prepared to give him up because he was loyal to Brian. So that was the sort of man Bruce McLaughlin was.
About 3 p.m. on a sunny winter afternoon on August 18, 1984, the Queensland racing industry was turned on its head in a debacle that left high-ranking reputations in tatters, put licensees in jail, and caused ramifications that linger until this day. It's part of racing, and maybe even Australian history now, that Hayden Haitana, a virtually unknown trainer, tried to substitute a lowly performed galloper called Fine Cotton for the far superior animal Bold Personality.
Started coming up onto his stand. Line's good. They're racing now. At the inside, Gravity Boy began nicely, and Fine Cotton showing speed. Plausible came out smartly. He's running third on, settling down. Harbour Gold going very quickly on the outside.
I was doing some work for 4BC on the day. We used to do interviews after every race. If I had an inkling it was a ring-in, I'd have pushed the button when I was talking to Hayden Haitana. So someone yelled out over the fence, ring-in, and then all of a sudden everyone started, thinking, because the horse's form is terrible. It couldn't win on form. I don't care what anyone says. I was here punting, and this race come along, and a bloke said to me, "What have you backed?" And he said, "You should be on Fine Cotton." And of course, I do the form on every race. I said, "Are you a lunatic?" I said, "It's got no, it is one that's got none." He said, "What you see is not what you see."
Just short of 800 metres to go. Many Rainbows joined now by Fine Cotton, and they're going along together. Harbour Gold in third place, Lord Radiant fourth on the outside of Gravity Boy, and then Abira.
I had this ex-trainer who used to go and have a look at the horses for me to see what they looked like, whether they were sweating in the yard or how they looked in one thing or other. And he came back to me that day and he said, "This looks terrible." He said, it's 100 to 1, this horse. So when it got into around about the 4 to 1 mark, I said, well, that's it. I'm not going any shorter now.
When I walked in the gate, the gatekeeper said to me, he said, "There's a certainty in, Fine Cotton in soon." And I had a look at the book, and I see Hayden Haitana. I had a look at it, and I thought, yeah.
I can remember what the fluctuations were coming through, and I was looking at the monitor, and I thought, strike me right.
Opening up now, 450 metres to go. Fine Cotton's the leader. He's a length in front. On the outside, Harbour Goes running on gamely, and then Gravity Boy, Lord Radiant, Plausible, and Samavari to the extreme outside.
So anyway, I go up to watch the race, and this money's all poured in for this horse and that, And I said, well, I must be the best mug on the ground because this cannot win.
Fine Cotton still the leader. He's about a neck in front. Harbour Gold's coming at him solidly now. Fine Cotton and Harbour Gold, they're going to fight it out. Harbour Gold's just about got his nose in front. Fine Cotton's kicking again on the inside. Fine Cotton and Harbour Gold. Fine Cotton's in front. They're drawing to the line. He's just in front. Fine Cotton, Harbour Gold lunge right on the line. They hit it all. Gee, this is close.
And then he won. He won by a nose. I remember saying in the call, I think Fine Cotton's wanted a nose to Harbour Gold.
I walked down out of the stand down to the back way, and there's people running everywhere screaming, "It's a ring-in, it's a ring-in," and that. So I walked up here to the rails, and I ran into a very knowledgeable person, and he said, "It's a ring-in."
Mayhem reigned in the betting rings here at Eagle Farm following the announcement of the disqualification of Fine Cotton. The little-known Coffs Harbour 8-year-old was backed in from 33 to 1 to start 7 to 2 equal favourite.
I actually rode the horse in a race for the man that owned him, Bill Naone, Bold Personality. And as soon as I saw the horse, I recognised him, but I just put my head down and went the other way because I wanted nothing to do with it. Because I was riding in Singapore and I wasn't involved here and I wasn't involved with the horse at all.
Well, they were inspecting the horse and it had become quite evident that, he'd been painted with paint and it was starting to melt with the sweat and everything. So they took about another 10 minutes and he was disqualified.
After a district court trial lasting 7 weeks and involving 70 witnesses, 3 men faced the jury's verdict. Tom DeLucio, electronics technician, on the charge of conspiracy to defraud, found not guilty. Robert Roy North, company director, guilty. And Hayden Haitana, horse trainer, guilty. There were no signs of emotion from the 3 men in the dock.
In the aftermath, Leviathan Sydney bookmaker Bill Waterhouse and his son Robbie were warned off Australian racecourses. Haitana was also barred from Australian racecourses for life and spent time in prison, along with conspiracy mastermind John Gillespie.
The best part to me about fine cotton is that it was discovered on the day before correct weight. Stewards ruled the correct weight be held until they checked it out, and the perpetrators were found out and duly disqualified. So if you want to put a positive spin on fine cotton, that was it.
And certainly we've come a long way from there with the identification of horses, microchipping. That's we've come into that era now where horses are microchipped, and some horses at the races here today could be identified at least 2, maybe 3 on 3 occasions.
Funny thing, everyone remembers Fine Cotton the race, but not many people ever remember the jockey who rode him. There's a 3-kilo apprentice called Gus Philpott.
He was cleared of any involvement, but the mud stuck. Despite living for almost a quarter of a century in the shadow of Fine Cotton, he's never met the real horse until now.
I was supposed to meet you 24 years ago. Changed our lives a lot.
Gus is now a horse trainer west of Cairns.
Easy does it, easy does it. You're a better stride than me. The question was, why me? Why did I get picked, There was heaps of other apprentices, why couldn't they pick them, or other jockeys at the time, Never got that answer.
Fine Cotton's a part of Queensland racing legend. It's always going to be there. It's always going to be mentioned. It'll come up in dispatches over the years, all because they didn't check the brands of the horse.
Not far from McLaughlin's Thornhill Park and about 50 minutes drive from Brisbane was another big parcel of desolate land that would soon become the new jewel in Queensland's glittering crown. In 1985, the Sunshine Coast Turf Club developed a vast piece of old swamp into Corball Park, and the jockeys and trainers who had relocated their operations north in anticipation of working at Australia's newest racecourse and training facility were elated with what they found.
Well, we have a very large sand track, then a number 2 grass, 1,500 metres, and an inside plough track which one day could be converted to a wood chip if circumstances permit. We believe it is the best grass training track for many miles around, and we're very proud of it. It would do a lot of racing tracks credit to have a grass that good.
As it was the first time that the horses were on it this morning, what was the reaction from the men who train the horses and the men who ride the horses?
Wayne, standing at the underpass as they were coming out, there was large smiles, and everyone's in agreement. It is a wonderful training surface. Our feature race is sponsored by the local newspaper, The Daily, and that will be worth $25,000. It's a 2,400 metre cup. We have 2 other prime events, the Channel 7 race worth $12,500 and the Radio 4SS also worth $12,500.
It's going to be a great day, isn't it?
Yes, we've got a $10,000 invitation stakes for invitation jockeys, and that'll be named in honour of the Honourable R.J. Hinds.
Leading jockeys and trainers from across the country made the journey from their home bases to christen the state-of-the-art racecourse at its opening meeting, just like they did when Queensland Racing gave the place a facelift more than 20 years later. With the drought taking a stranglehold on grass courses across Australia, the SCTC made the proactive decision to build a cushion track to supplement the grass course proper. Made of synthetic fibres, rubber, silicon, sand and wax, the cushion surface was designed to cope with torrential rain and drought alike, which would enable the SCTC to race all year round in any weather. The audacious plan included the installation of lights around the track's massive circumference to enable night racing on both the grass and synthetic tracks. It's a long, long way from living in a busted-up old caravan in Queensland's far north to breaking the greatest unbeaten run of success ever seen in Australian racing history. But it seems nobody ever told Brian Mayfield Smith just how far it was. A former stockman and cane cutter, Mayfield Smith started his training career with just 2 horses given to him by a family friend in Cairns and ended up the toast of Australian racing.
Yeah, they had these old stables in Cairns. I mean, they're like sheds really, and they had a very low roof on them and no lights. And, you know, I had this little caravan you couldn't swing a cat in. I mean, if you laid in the bed up the end, you had to pull your legs up a bit. You couldn't stretch out. It was under a big fig tree there near the I think it's near about the 1400. And, you know, I got a couple of horses through Kevin Lucy, who owned Marionvale Station, and Kevin and June Smid and Von Dobbin, who owned pubs in Mareeba and Cairns, through my mother, who was friends with them. And basically Alan Atkinson also started me off. He gave me a couple of horses to get ready for the Mount Garnet picnic races. So, you know, that's what I started from, really. And I had to load hand-cut sugarcane and drive trucks up on the tableland for about 6 months to get a bank to get started as a trainer. So, you know, I didn't just walk into it.
While his early memories are centred on battlers and bush tracks, Mayfield Smith always allowed himself to dream, and the boy from the bush quickly showed he possessed the natural talent to translate his big dreams into big wins. From Cairns, he shifted south to Townsville and then on to Brisbane, where he met with immediate success. But the best was clearly yet to come.
Horse that really got me going there was a horse that was owned by Gil Jakes. He trained him himself in Townsville, called Torbadol. And he won his first start for me at Doomben. Paul Gordy rode him, and then he got beat his next start and he won his next 5 straight. So, I mean, I couldn't have hoped for a better start into metropolitan racing.
Years earlier, Mayfield Smith told a mate in Cairns he would one day knock the immortal Tommy Smith off his perch as Sydney's premier trainer. And after moving to the harbour city in the early 80s, his goal all of a sudden became a lot closer. 2 of Australia's biggest owners in flamboyant Englishman Robert Sangster and Bob Lapointe shared a dream to establish the nation's biggest stable. And when they set up the all-conquering Nebo Lodge, they asked Mayfield Smith to be their private trainer. From his world-class training establishment at Rose Hill, Mayfield Smith achieved mission impossible in the 1985-86 season, when he upstaged Smith and broke his previously unbeaten record of 33 Sydney Trainers Premierships.
Even though I sort of made this virtually outlandish sort of, you know, prediction about myself, I'm probably, my common sense told me that it'll probably never happen. But so for it to happen, I just thought, I can't believe this. You know, this is just, I've got away with murder here. I mean, just sort of started off as sort of a nobody in racing, come from North Queensland, knocked off Tommy Smith. I mean, how good's that?
Duck is the leader. Mother Duck in front.
Mayfield Smith backed up to win the following 2 premierships to prove his first victory was no fluke, and also trained numerous Group 1 winners, including Handy Proverb in the VRC Derby in 1985 and Marauding in the Golden Slipper 2 years later.
Justice as they turn for home, and then Prince Anton and Marauding as badly.
You know, I mean, Marauding, he only raced briefly, but he was pretty exciting because he you know, he just had this brilliant ability, just come out as soon as we tried him. You know, he thought, man, this is some horse, this, you know. So, and he was a Sir Tristram, he won a Golden Slipper.
Now Marauding, Lygon Arms, and further out boasting. What a finish coming up. It's Lygon Arms and Marauding. Marauding won the Slipper.
There was sort of a lot of other horses like Rare Form and Stacey Bond, a very exciting mare that really finished hard, and Brindisi, who was my first Group 1 winner, and Winter's Dance, who won her first, I think, 6 straight as a 3-year-old, and started favourite for a Stradbroke, unbeaten, you know, like up to that point. And I mean, Tiger Town, you know, Torbadol, I mean, you know, for me, when those horses were racing, they were pretty exciting times.
Getting near the line, they've come from everywhere. Tiger Town just led, and O'Larney's has got right up on the inside and might have beaten him.
But then, 10 years later in 1995, and at the peak of his prowess, Mayfield Smith stunned the racing industry when he announced his immediate retirement and followed his love of animals all the way to the plains of South Africa. However, it was only 2 years before he was overcome with a yearning to once again train racehorses, and the master returned to Melbourne, where he enjoyed abundant success at the highest level until he again announced his retirement in November 2009. Former champion jockey and Hall of Fame hero Larry Olsen had for years been regarded as one of the nation's most talented horsemen, but his battle with weight had cruelly curtailed his brilliant career. But in 1986, Olsen was overcome once again with a burning desire to get back into the silks and ride winners, big race winners.